Okay, thank you, Dara. Anybody else? All right, I'm seeing a few hands. That's good news. Okay, um, I want to share with you first where we're getting this information for these webinars. The Department of Education has begun a series for Georgia Milestones as well. And these are also grade band specific and are unique to both ELA and math. And as they are presenting their webinars, they are archiving them in the same way that we are. We also have been doing a number of constructed response trainings, sometimes in conjunction with thinking maps and other times just without that particular initiative. But we have taken the training PowerPoints for those webinars along with information and PowerPoint slides from the DOE webinars and added with them some of the sample prototype questions that were being referred to from the DOE. This website that you see here at tinyurl.com/GA milestones ELA, that is the site where where all of the ELA materials for these webinars are being housed. And I'll take a moment and minimize my PowerPoint to direct us to that page. And I want to show you that on that page, we are keeping the PowerPoints and webinar recordings, as I mentioned. This is also a link here directly to the Georgia Milestones Assessment System homepage from the DOE homepage. Additionally, we have linked the DOE's webinars for Georgia Milestones, which, have, as I said, have just recently begun. And they are calling those the Eliciting Evidence of Student Learning webinars. And here are the first few to access. Many of you may have already listened in on those. I hope so. They're really very well done. Here's a link to their archived webinars. Here's a link to all of our upcoming PL opportunities, which we are aligning to the specific TKES standards so that you might more easily see if there's something upcoming that could be of help. Of course, our Georgia Formative Instructional Practices Initiative through the DOE and their specifically the module number 4 for the formative instructional practices is very much a very useful resource for this topic. And so I've put a reminder there as a link. And also within the DOE's recent Eliciting Evidence of Student Learning webinars, they have suggested in their resources slide at the end a number of key research and articles. And these are the ones that are referenced as the primary sources for those DOE eliciting evidence of student learning webinars. And so I've simply just taken those titles and linked them to the actual article. So these again are articles that the DOE suggests that we read, and these are some quick links to them. Over on the right-hand side of this very simple web page, I've put the links to those state resources, including our own State of Georgia resource, where we have been told we might find sample or prototype second generation assessment questions. So in other words, the Department of Education has said in numerous publications and webinars that one great place for us to find practice questions for our students is the Formative Item Bank. This is a link to that start page and reminder of how to access that. Also, the Smarter Balanced and PARC item prototype resources are linked here. Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Career, the PARC, as you will remember, is the assessment entity that was at first going to provide us with sample questions. And even though we are no longer getting our questions for the Georgia Milestones from that particular entity, we have been told that the questions are very much in the vein of these PARC questions, and that these PARC questions, along with the Smarter Balance questions and the NAEP questions and the questions from these different Department of Educations, they all remain really good resources for us as we work to give students deliberate practice. So again, this one web page is just a place to quickly, I hope, click around to these different resources. So I'll go back now to the PowerPoint. That's not the PowerPoint I want to go back to. Just a moment. This PowerPoint. Okay, yes. So in our brief time today, our learning targets are as follows. We want to build our capacity to introduce students to the expectations, format, and content of constructed response questions. And we already have a capacity to do this. We already work with students every day, and you already do wonderful things to support their learning and to build their confidence. This webinar is just simply another resource to perhaps further build that capacity. Also, we would like as a learning target for each of us to think about, as we work through this PowerPoint and this discussion, what are our personal next steps? What do we personally need to do next in order to continue to prepare students and as we support them in second generation assessment work? So I mentioned that on the little web page that we created, that we've been linking back to the DOE's Assessment for Learning webinar series. Just two quick bullet points here about those. The Assessment for Learning webinar series from the DOE is called an Assessment for Learning series and is designed to support teachers with the understanding of using appropriate formative assessments. The topics in those Assessment for Learning series are listed here with 5 different modules in series 1 and 2. And again, you can access those directly by clicking on the link on the web page. And then also I wanted to share with you that as a start to that to one of their webinars, they reminded us that that this very much is assessment for learning. And yes, when the kids take the Georgia Milestones tests, it will actually be a summative test, and it will involve an assessment of learning. But we can use these resources, these sample test questions. We can use the format in deliberate practice as assessment for learning to help us make adjustments along the way and to help us identify specifically what kids need as they are encountering these first set of summative tests that do involve constructed response. They gave a really nice chart here, which my PowerPoint is making it look all weird, but it actually is like a circle. And they reminded us that once there has been a deconstruction of the standard, that the teacher begins by assessing the current knowledge, either through observation or pre-test or formative assessment, that then there is a lesson created and a formative assessment created specifically to see how the lesson went, and that then from there, the teachers are deliberately teaching and then assessing learning again, providing feedback again, redesigning and teaching again. And just a reminder that this assessment for learning is a continuous cycle. Here's something that that many of us already know. Of course, you know that our federal requirements for Race to the Top are requiring us to have a new generation of assessments and that they be of high quality. And in particular, that they consolidate the ELA, the reading and the writing into a single measure. So that integrated approach to instruction and assessment is new for us in this in these new second generation tests. That we're aware and hopefully ready for the fact that there is an increased rigor, and that the point of that is to align with college and career expectations, and that we want to be very consistent with the alignment to the standards. There was a a pilot administration of the kind of questions that students would take on this test in both through both the DOE and also nationally. And this slide here is an indication that just to show the really big disconnect between how our 8th grade students on our state measure was assessed at a meeting and exceeding of 83%. And that same group of kids who were Georgia students on the NAEP were given 29% and at or above proficient. So there's just obviously a big disconnect between a national measure of performance for students in ELA and math and what we had previously. This is a slide that just gives a quick indication of how that pilot program went. And as you can see, when the sample students from that pilot were given the sample questions that were second generation type questions, they were overwhelmingly underprepared. And in fact, the large majority of students were scored in the very low ranges in 0, 1, 2, and 3, and that was across the board for 3rd grade through 12th grade. That was not, of course, a reflection of teacher work and instruction of that year. It wasn't a reflection of their intelligence. It was just simply a reflection of their unfamiliarity with this type of assessment and with this particular constructed response format. So we know already that constructed response questions are assessment items that will ask students to apply knowledge, skills, and critical thinking, and that these will be in real-world scenarios and in standards-driven performance tasks. There will be more than one way to correctly answer these questions, and of course that makes a great deal of sense to us, and we think, well, certainly there would be. Students need to be told that there are multiple approaches and multiple responses that are appropriate. Sometimes students in a constructed response assessment moment feel a little paralyzed because they recognize that there could be alternate answers, but then they worry that there's only perhaps one answer that's really looked for. We need to let students know that just as their intuition tells them that there are multiple approaches and answers, there really are acceptable multiple approaches and answers. And so we can, just as a quick point, we can assist them in their preparation for second generation assessments by showing them multiple answers from students or having them talk through how they would do it, how another student would do it, etc., and make comparisons and then point out that these were different approaches, these were different responses, but that they were both appropriate. They will not have the benefit of suggestions or choices. They will have the dreaded empty space, so to speak. And that, of course, mentally is very different from looking at a handful of answers and knowing that one of them is in fact true and right there for you to just simply find. So why do students have trouble on constructed response questions? Why do our Georgia students have trouble on constructed response questions? Well, certainly there are a number of reasons, but for one thing, the students often don't answer the specific question. They're nervous. Sometimes they just jump in and start speaking of or writing about what they do know. And although it's great that they know something, that might not be the question that was asked. So students are having difficulty responding to the specific question. Sometimes their response is very shallow, and we recognize that it needs more details, but they feel that they have answered the question sufficiently. Some students get off topic as they write. Other students will have either technology or spelling or handwriting issues that will impact their score. One of the biggest obstacles, however, is students simply not understanding what the question is asking. I mentioned earlier the students writing about what the passage talked about, restating, re-summarizing instead of answering. And I apologize that this last bullet is hard to see. It is completely because I made a PowerPoint. Now I'm trying to look at the PowerPoint on my Mac, and you know that doesn't always go so well. So the final bullet there says that students are they don't think about which items and which points of information might be used. They're not used to lifting and using information. They're used to just identifying information. Let me look at A, B, C, D, and E, and now let me select or identify the one that I like. So they're just not in the habit of going from empty space to a constructed response. The little points here in red, these are just instances of what we can do to be helpful. We want to provide students the opportunity to identify the question that's being asked and to restate the question, to come up with an answer that is expected, to practice looking at a response and actually marking through the part of a response that is off topic or not pertinent to the question. We want to have students practice taking a response that has begun to go in the right direction, but that does not have enough flesh and details from the text, and have them practice adding that. We want to have students practice identifying and describing the audience that is either directly stated or implied through the question. Well, so how do we give kids all this practice? Well, one way that we can give kids this kind of practice is to not insist that they actually work through every single point of this process. For example, maybe as a ticket out the door, we've been learning about light refraction, but then all of a sudden, as a ticket out the door, we just have a prompt, the kind of prompt that you would see actually on a second generation test. And the kids are told, don't actually write this, don't actually respond, but instead restate the question. Or here's a prompt. What would be one sentence that you expect to find in a response? Or here's a response that somebody else gave. Just simply cross out sentences that you think don't belong. Or here's two sentences that a student has given in response to this prompt. Your job isn't to do the whole prompt and to actually do the whole response, but simply add a few words to what is already written here, and show that you know how to improve upon it. Or here's a prompt. Your job isn't right now to actually work through the whole thing, but just circle the one word that gives you the best indication of who the audience is that you're writing for. So just the sheer number of opportunities for them to encounter the prompt in its fancy language, in its fancy form. That should be really helpful for students to do that. We know that there are some unique features for our Georgia milestones. There will be selected response, that we haven't, moved away from multiple choice, but that in addition to it, we have constructed responses, extended responses, and technology enhanced items to begin in 1617. These ELA test parameters. This is indication of what had transpired with the prototypes. We are still waiting for some specifics, which we will get, and we've been told that in the fall we will have some additional information about the specifics of our Georgia Milestones test. One thing that certainly is a big difference is that we no longer have key grades where writing is a focus. Writing has an equal focus now at every grade from, of course, all the way from kindergarten up, but in assessment terms on the milestones, from 3 up to the upper grades. We know also that there will be rubrics for each question, and that the rubrics will be unique to the question. And like, for example, if you look at this rubric, it actually says expects healthy cookies, expects healthy cookies to taste bad, blah, blah, blah. Well, obviously this isn't a rubric that's going to work for every passage, but it's one that was specifically designed for a question about why healthy cookies might actually taste good. So our rubrics, we know, are going to be numeric, rather holistic. We're not used to that kind of a rubric with our writing. We're used to having different domains, and you might excel in one domain and not another. This one, this example from this rubric question, and this rubric came from a Georgia OAS question. This particular one is much more holistic, where there's just a designation of a score based on the depth of the understanding of the response. Okay, so this particular slide comes from a colleague of mine, Dawn Bennett. Many of you have worked with Dawn before and know that she's an excellent trainer and support for teachers. And she has suggested a simple mnemonic for students whenever they encounter a constructed response question. It's the RACE mnemonic. R for reword or restate the question. A for provide your short answer. C, cite your evidence from the text. And then E, explain how what you cited in that third section actually contributes to the question and the answer. And there is a little response organizer that we have on our page that could be used for this purpose. Again, I think one of the strongest strategies we can use to help kids get ready for constructed response is to just let them encounter constructed response, 11 times as opposed to like 2 times, or 20 times as opposed to like 3 times throughout the year. And rather than putting out the whole entire exchange of read the passage, here's your prompt, here's the work you do, write your response. Instead, just simply have them zone in on a certain aspect of what that work would be and have them examine that work, talk about that work, because one thing that they are lacking is deliberate practice and the confidence that comes from just simply having seen enough of these kind of questions to know what it feels like to attack them, to approach them. Okay, so we're in this mnemonic with RACE, with the restatement, the answer, the citation of evidence, and then the explanation. The first part of that is very much along the lines of just the restatement. So here's a very, very simple question. How did Little Red Riding Hood know the character in the bed was not her grandmother? Well, if this were a constructed response question, then the kids would have been given a Little Red Riding Hood passage to read, and then they would have been given this question, and then it would have had the expected Common Core tag of be sure to use examples from the text to support your answer. Well, one good bit of deliberate practice is to have students simply write from this question what is the flipped around response statement. So, how did Little Red Riding Hood know the character in the bed was not her grandmother? Becomes Little Red Riding Hood knew the character in the bed was not her grandmother because. This is very simple, but kids need practice with it. We want to give kids the opportunity to come up with their own prompts. They could ask any question. What did you do last night after you got home from school? After I got home from school last night, I ... So kids can create their own questions and turn around to a partner and have the partner provide for them the expected first sentence response for such a question. And of course, we want to differentiate that. So for a number of our students, it can be an appropriate activity to have them write the expected first sentence response for this prompt, and then share your improved, more original, more stylistic response, and perhaps even and a quick explanation of why yours is better. So it's true we don't want kids to become entirely formulaic in their writing, that what we're striving for is a personal style. But if that has to come later and we simply want to be able to achieve a response to the in the constructed response scenario, then it is very appropriate for perhaps even the majority of our students to simply get practice going from the prompt itself, which might be many sentences, to the what might be the first sentence that you expect to see, or that you could logically see as a response. There are a number of words that we know that if they follow, that then we will be on the right track. Words like because, to, by, when, if, until. And so letting kids know that these are words that we expect to encounter, and that that they can be on the lookout for opportunities to use those words, and then that will be very helpful. We might have them actually take a prompt and then physically slash through the words that get changed. So what do you do in the evening when you get home from school becomes in the evening when I get home from school, da da da. Why were the three bears upset when they returned home? Three bears were upset when they returned home because, etc. Okay, so in the classroom, this could look really different, and you could have one person working to simply orally restate. You could have someone who marks it on a sentence strip. You could have somebody who becomes the scribe. You could have students work in full group or small group on the simple restatement. Here's just some other examples. Let me go past this one. Okay. Practice of the restating. Okay. Another thing that we want kids to know about constructed response, I think we might be able to use the analogy of actually constructing, because we want to ask the kids, can you construct without materials? Well, no. If you're going to construct something, you've got to get your materials. Well, what are the materials of a constructed response? They are little pieces of the original source, which is the text, and then they have to be glued together with something. So we want to talk to them about, how do you find the little pieces of the text that you build with, quote unquote, and then how do you also find the little expected statements and transition words that serve as the glue. Another thing we need to share with students, and that might go along with this analogy as well, is that when you're building something for someone, if you're an artist or you're a construction worker, if you're building something, they're not going to want it to just look any certain way. They're going to have like a style they're looking for. So you're the builder. You've got to find the materials. You've got to figure out how you can stick them all together. And you also have to know, what style does your customer want? So what is the expected style from the information we have about the audience? Okay, so one thing that we wanted to achieve with each of these webinars is to simply pull an example from one of those resources that are listed on the right-hand side of that web page. And this is an example for 8th grade students, and it comes from the NAEP test. And here is the full and fancy prompt that the kids get. Your school board is studying ways to reduce vandalism, destruction of property at your school. You've been appointed as a student advisor to write a report to the school board about the problem of vandalism and how to solve it. To help you get started, your school board has given you a chart in envelope M, which provides information about the extent of vandalism in your school. The school board wants you to discuss ways to prevent some of the different types of vandalism, which include writing graffiti, destroying furniture, breaking windows, damaging trees, etc. In your report, describe the extent of vandalism in your school and discuss what you think are the main reasons for vandalism. Then present the board with a plan for how to stop vandalism in your school, and be so specific that the board can actually implement it. Is what that says there at the bottom. Then if you click to open envelope M, this is what you see. You see this chart, which obviously is an opportunity for kids to do some some reading of a visual text. Okay, so how might we use this NAEP item in our classroom? Well, one thing we can do is just simply print out the chart and have students work either in groups or individually to turn the chart into a series of sentences. What are some sentences that we could pull from this chart? What are some examples of sentences? And for some students, you could just give that charge and then off they go. With other students, you might have to give them a sentence starter. Turn the chart into sentences, ... Okay. So acts of vandalism during the school year are, what words might follow, right? Almost every year there has been an increase in the number of reported cases. The chart shows that the problem is getting worse, increasing, whatever. And then vandalism might include acts such as so and so. So if you're giving students this chart and the task to turn it into some sentences, you can either provide them with some sentence starters or have them work in groups to construct sentences. Then those sentences can actually be cut out, right? Like onto little slips of paper. We want to have lots of suggested connector or glue statements. And this might be a great poster to put somewhere, but there are just a lot of expected connector glue statements. On page so-and-so, it said, an example of this is, we know this because the author said this in the text. According to the text also states, etc. This shows, now I know, now we see. There are just a lot of those kind of predictable but really necessary glue statements, and we want to talk to students about what they are. We might hand them a paragraph, and all they're actually doing with it is circling glue statements. It might be a paragraph they've never had any encounter with, but we know it's a response from some kind of prompt of constructed response on some kind of test. And we want to have them maybe underline the information that they probably got from the text and circle the information that they probably got from just knowing a list of expected suggested glue statements. You can have the students take the sentences that they wrote from the chart, cut them up, have them complete these kind of sentence prompts for your connector or glue statements, cut those up as well, and then piece them all together, constructing the response actually with the sentence starters, the transition words, and the evidence from the text, and have them bring it all together. You could do this as full group or in small groups, etc. One thing that they would do with this particular example is they would talk through who's likely to want this information, who is this chart made for, who cares about the number of acts of vandalism, etc. And then when you actually show or go back to the prompt, then you can have students point out the words that give us the hint about what kind of style we're looking for. Words such as student advisor. You're a student advisor. You're going to speak in the language of a student advisor. What would that mean? You're going to write a report. What's the language of a report? How's a report different from telling a story? How's a report different from building an argument, etc.? And then it says you're presenting to a particular audience. Down at the bottom, you have kids look through this, find out, put a star next to who the audience is. Well, it's the board. They find that. And then you want students to have the opportunity to take the sentences that they got from translating the chart, and then take the sentences that they got from their expected everyday sort of glue sentences that go with connecting cited ideas, and then put them all together. You can then have the students trade them around, talk about the differences, and then you want to have them double check to see if the content of what they came up with does in fact touch upon everything that they were supposed to include here. So another act that could be another task that could be performed just with this prompt itself, and maybe not even doing any other work, is to simply list what are the points of content that this response is calling for. And so if you read through them, you see, okay, they're asking you, how do you prevent the vandalism? So that's got to go in there. They want to know what's the extent of the vandalism. So that's got to go in there. They want to know what's a plan for the vandalism. So that's got to go there. So, so essentially that's just another way to have them encounter the prompt. I like to have students back into the prompt, so to speak. And one way that could be done with this kind of sample question is to just simply, show the chart as the first thing. Talk about, how do you read this chart? What kind of sentences could we get from this chart? Who would ever want to, who's this chart made for? What kind of problem is this chart showing us? What kind of sentences do you think might show up in a paragraph about this chart? And then have then to say, well, if you were going to present this to a school board, you wouldn't want to just tell them that the vandalism happened. You would also want to have some kind of a little plan. So do you have any ideas for that? And have students talk through all that. And then I just suggest that one of the last things you do is actually look at this full-on prompt, whether it's the first time they've seen it or returning back to it, just so you can have the opportunity to say to kids, look what you just did. You actually took this prompt, which sounds so impossible, many, many sentences. You're going to have to write a report. You're going to have to come up with a plan. It seems like, oh my gosh, that's so much to do. But you just actually did it. So, one thing that we're suggesting is just for the teacher to have enough access to a handful of these sample questions so that the teacher can use them in all kinds of different ways. It could be that we've only got 3 minutes left, so let's just look at this prompt from a constructed response, and let's just circle the words that give us a hint about who the audience is. All right. Now, a couple days later, let's take this prompt, and maybe we don't have time to work the whole thing, but let's just write 2 or 3 sentences that we expect might be in somebody's response, or let's find the words. Let's look at our poster of all these expected glue statements, and which ones do you think might make their way nicely into a response? There's obviously a great deal that you can do with these. You can do much less if you insist on working through the whole process. Now, kids obviously are going to need to have at least, a good, strong experience of walking through the whole process so they can have the stamina to continue to do that kind of work, so they can get that kind of confidence. But mostly we can build performance by building familiarity with these kinds of constructed response questions, and just giving kids an indication of how do you attack them, how do you address them. I know it's easier said than done, but we're hoping that having the quick links to a number of the ones that the DOE have suggested will be really useful. So here's just a question to leave us with on this wonderful Friday afternoon. What do you personally need to do next? Is it, I need to access some of those sites, I need to print off blah, blah, blah? Is it, I need to go ask a colleague a question I have about this? Is it, I need to take this PowerPoint and look for a chart like the glue chart? I mean, what is it exactly that you should do next, just in your own mind, to keep the whole process moving of using your available resources and talents to help kids access the question itself, and to feel like they have had the deliberate practice that gets them to the point where they can perform when it really matters. We'll be making webinars like this once a month, and so the next time around, we'll take another one or two samples from another test and work through possibilities with those. If you have any questions, if there's anything we can do to be of help, please let us know. We very much want to be useful in this big state effort to get kids more likely to perform on these constructed response questions. And also, since this is our first, this is just September, and this is just our first attempt at grade level ELA and math webinars specific to Georgia Milestones, you may have some great ideas for what could be done during this time, and I encourage you to email me if you'd like to share that information, or if you'd like to just give a quick response on this survey about this particular webinar, then I would really appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend. I'm so excited it's Friday. I bet you are as well. And thanks for being so dedicated that you've hung in here at nearly 4 o'clock on a Friday. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I can unmute everybody now and we can ask questions if you'd like. Hi, Erica. Were you having a problem with something? Oh, thanks, Kathy. If you have any questions, you can type them in the comment box. Otherwise, I will send you a link to this recording for you to use in any way you'd like, along with the PowerPoint. Thank y'all very much. Thanks, Erica. I'm glad you can hear now.
Thank you.
Bye. I'll take this back to the main page so you can see the URL again. There it is. tinyurl.com/GA milestones ELA.
Oh my God.